Okay, so we're going to get started learning how to use our 3D printing tools here. So I'm going to show you some examples and how to configure the software. And so the first step is actually configuring the software. And so on your computer, it's going to be this one right here entitled Prusa Slicer is the one that you want. And some of the things are going to be a little bit different for you depending on the version that you have. But at some point, we should hopefully all have the same version. Okay, so this is the software we're using. Again, depending on the version you have, things might look a little bit different, but we're going to specifically look at some of the key things that we need to do to get things running the way we expect them to. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we need to set up our configuration. So when you open this up the first time, it's going to open up a window, and in that window, it's going to say, it's going to be the configuration window wizard. So if you accidentally close out of it, you need to open up here. Okay, and then you could probably just say don't install this if you see that window. So mine's taking a while to open, but all your information about the printer that you're using and your settings are right here. And so if you don't see a printer selected, then you need to make sure you go back and you get that fixed. Okay, so here's our configuration wizard. Here's where we want to be. We see the Mark IV family, and you may or may not see this input shaper option, but you're going to see this original Prusa Mark IV. And you need to select this one, the 0.4 millimeter nozzle. Okay? There's other printers down here. We don't have the mini, so you don't need that one. But here we have the Mark III, and this is the one that we have by the windows in the classroom. And so if you need to use one of those, you may want to add those later. For now, though, just add the Mark IV, and then click Finish. Okay? Then, when you're selecting your printer, you can click right here from this drop down here. And so you can see I've got a few selected here. We just need this one right here, the Mark IV with the 0.4 nozzle. Okay. And then this is where you select your print layer height. And so you could think about this as when the printer's printing, how high those layers stack. We want them to be, for the most part, as big as possible, unless you need some quality, in which case you'll drop it down to maybe like 0.15. Otherwise, I do everything at 0.3. Okay, and we're going to be using generic PLA for our material. Potentially, we'll do PETG. We also have a flexible. I don't even see that on here. I'll have to get that added on here. But so those are the ones we're going to use. Okay, so we have it configured. You're going to want to submit a screenshot of this once you have that configured. And if your profile gets wiped or you add on or you end up on a different laptop, you are going to need to configure this again. Okay? And so now that we've got that done, let's look at interacting with this. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to come to here. So this is Onshape, right? And we want to, let's say we want to export this part to Prusa Slicer. So you can select the parts from over here that you want to export and right click, and you can see that export button. Okay, so you can export that way, or you can come over to here and you can export from the bottom, and that will export the entire part studio. So that's all the parts. When you export it, we want to just highlight some things. First, that we have STL selected, okay, and that our units are selected to be millimeters. Okay, everything else you can leave alone. There's some other options here. Store file and interesting. So yeah, we don't care about that. You have a resolution option. This would probably affect the file size. I wouldn't mess with that. And so we're going to say export. Okay, and it went ahead and downloaded it for us. Okay, and so we come back to here. And now if we want to add that, we're going to click add right there. And then in our downloads folder, you'll see caster amount, or whatever the file is that you added. Okay, so here's that file right here in the Prusa Slicer. And so some things that we need to do is probably orient it the right way. So we have this option here, that's rotate option. Now we could get these handles to like rotate it. But even more powerful option is this place on face option. And so you can click that and you can select on a face. Okay, just like that. And then we've got it placed. That's probably the best way to print that piece. If we want to add additional copies of it, we can click this add instance, and then you can click this to arrange it like that. You can also do Control C to copy, and then Control V to paste as well. And you can see it kind of shows up differently when you copy it versus add an instance, but it kind of behaves in the same way. Okay, so I'm going to delete some of these because I don't want this many of them. I don't want to shoot with something else, so I'm going to delete some of these. Okay, so we got just our caster mount again. Let's say that this is two parts, or this is two parts, and let's say I want to split it. So if I press this button right here, I can split it to objects, and it's going to separate those for me. Okay. Now if I'm ready to print it, I click Slice Now, and it's going to generate these instructions. So what it did was it generated instructions for the printer, and you can analyze it here by dragging this up and down. Now you can look, and you can have a pretty good idea if you're going to have issues here. For example, when we look at this bottom layer, you can see that ball is just touching at that tiny little bit. It's going to fail. And so you don't necessarily want to print something that's going to have that little area contacting the print surface because it's going to break loose. Okay, and so some ways around that we have, we can use something called a brim. And so if you have like flat edges that might curl up, you can use a brim. And you can see it adds that extra area around it. So sometimes we add a brim. You can also add supports. And so supports on build plate only. And you can see it did the supports there. Now, generally, I recommend if you're going to do supports, I usually try to do my own supports like in Onshape. Because these ones actually do okay on the Mark IV, but generally like they can be difficult to remove. Okay. So something else though, like let's say we were going to print this upside down, which wouldn't be smart for this piece, but let's say we did. The way that we would kind of handle that is we would also add those supports there, maybe add a brim. You can see it's adding all this extra material though, and especially on the inside there, it's going to be hard to get that out. And that's why I said if you can, and if you have to do supports, oftentimes it's better just to make them yourself so that you don't have to deal with some stuff like that. Okay, let's see if there's anything else here. So clicking this gets you to the slicer preview. Clicking here gets you back to the model. There's some other like more advanced things, like we can slice things into two parts. Like that, I can cut it in half. If you wanted to do that. You can add the place on face. We can scale it if you want to make it bigger or smaller. I don't recommend doing it. I personally recommend doing it on shape. I think if you want to scale it, just so you have more control. You can delete the part. We can add a new part. Something I did a while ago. Let's see what this one is. Oh, this is just like a little handle for something. Okay. So let's say we want to run it. So we click Slice Now. This one I got a brim on it. Probably could take the brim off. So if I make changes here, I just have to click Slice again. Okay. And now let's say I'm done and I'm ready to print. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Export G-code. Okay. And G-code is the file that's created with the instructions for the printer. Okay. And so when we're ready to export it, we do this. And we're going to want to change this to put our name here. Okay. So I'm going to put name. So Mr. Stafford _ and then we're going to call it handle. Okay. All right. Now this is the USB drive from the computer, or from the printer rather. And so I need to take that file and I need to save it onto here. Okay. And so when we stick this onto there, all right, the computer's going to recognize it, and we click here to grab their USB drive. And you can see there's a bunch of prints already on here. Okay. And so nobody's been using that naming process yet, because I'm just introducing it now. So you're going to put your name and then what it is. And something you can also do is, as these things start to get full, I would recommend, if there's more than 10 things on here, to go back and delete some things, just so that there's the printer doesn't have to spend a lot of time indexing when it opens up the USB drive. So we're going to click Save. And again, you want to make sure you're not saving to your Downloads folder or your Documents. You want to make sure you're saving it directly onto the drive. We're going to click Save there. And then we see it go exporting finished. And then I'm going to click this little button here to eject the drive. If we didn't see this eject drive button pop up, then we probably saved it in the wrong place. So you want to make sure you're saving it onto the drive. We'll press eject here. And now we're ready to print. Okay, so to recap the steps, in Onshape, when we export, we need to choose STL. STL is the type of model that basically it's a mesh of triangles, and that's how it's storing this 3D file. We export that. We take that 3D file and we import it into Prusa Slicer here. We double check that we've got our printer configured here, so the Prusa Mark IV. We double check that we're configured for PLA, and we check that our layer height is 0.3. If we don't have the printer set here, we do need to come over to our configuration wizard, and make sure we add that printer. Okay, and then when we're ready to print, let's get back here, and then have our printer select there. When we're ready to print, we click Slice Now. We check out our layers, make sure everything looks good. You can see your infill there. We've got different amounts of time for all the different things. You actually can change the infill percentage, and then if you wanted to get really fancy, you could actually change your infill settings to like different styles of infill. Like there's a whole bunch of different patterns. I generally just leave this stuff alone because it doesn't really matter that much unless you're doing something really fancy or creative. But when we're ready, we press export, and we're going to save it. Make sure we select the USB drive. I ejected mine, so let me pop it back in. So we make sure we save it to our USB drive. Make sure we put our name and then what it is we're printing. Okay, we save it, and then we click the little export button down here to export the drive. Okay, and then you're ready to print. Oh, and this is generating G-code, which is the instructions for the printer, and each line here shows what it's going to do for that particular layer of the print.